Let's bring in the panel here. Bob Rice, former prosecutor with the U.S. Justice Department, and Rob Taub, political humorist, available at robtaub.com. That's robtaub.com.
Correct.
So, the Swedish government is acting as nothing more than a puppet for the U.S. government, and this is all a political game to get him to eventually face a court here. Rob?
There are legal experts that are saying it is. He is protected by the First Amendment, that he's doing what a journalist would do. He's not a terrorist. He's being treated like a terrorist and not being afforded due process. And nobody seems to be talking about the culprit who actually took this material out first. And more importantly, you're talking about the Pentagon Papers. There was a book in the 1970s about the United States counterintelligence program. And then, for all intents and purposes, a hippie got a hold of this material, and it was all about the CIA talking about how they were going to infiltrate peace rallies and marches and do despicable things so that then war protesters would be hated. And it was overlooked because of the time, and we just didn't have this type of media. What would have happened to those people if that happened today? And they were protected under the First Amendment.
This is a good point. A lot of people have been talking about the Pentagon Papers case and those kind of cases. And Julian Assange, in fact, wrote an op-ed in the Australian newspaper owned by News Corp, our parent company, yesterday, in which he invoked the spirit of the Pentagon Papers as well. But is this the same? Is this the same issue here? It's purely a case of if somebody has those secrets there and they should be, you know, he says it's all about the truth. He's just trying to get the truth out to the American people and the global public.
Well, look, I mean, there are moral and ethical issues here, and then he's trying to hide behind those, and I don't think it's valid. I don't think, quote, the truth here, what truth is he exposing other than an earnest effort? And I think what these ironically, Jonathan, what I think these cables have actually show is the U.S. State Department is doing a pretty good job. And by the way, that the people in the field are quite good writers.
Which is another point that Assange made in his op-ed. You can't have it both ways. You say that there's nothing significant in here, and actually you make the U.S. look quite good. So then how am I a threat to national security?
Exactly. I agree with that. Also, why are we lumping these sex crimes in there? That makes me automatically suspicious that we don't really have a case against him. So let's try him publicly before anything's happened by making him look like a rapist and a pervert.
Well, no, I mean, those are quite useful because you have to hold him in the UK on something, and you can't hold him
on
in the
UK. On a trumped-up charge, maybe.
No, well, no, I don't think it's a trumped-up charge. I think it's simply an unprosecuted charge, and I think it's quite useful. And I personally, I mean, maybe I shouldn't say this, but I hope that that's exactly what's happening, that they're holding him in jail for this reason, and they are getting ready with the big punch, and it may be a direct extradition to the United States under conspiracy to commit espionage charges, or it may be after he gets to Sweden.
So bottom line, you want to see him in a U.S. court?
Absolutely, I do.
Rob?
I think at this point there's no choice. He's got to come here to defend himself. So, yes.
Do you think he should be charged with some sort of crimes under the Espionage Act, though?
No, I don't. I think he's done what plenty of other journalists would have done if they had.
So you want to see him here to have the chance to make that argument and clear his name, and you want to see him here to get put behind bars.
I want to see him here. Well, one thing I'd like to do is find out more of the facts. We don't know how these papers actually got in there. If, for example, he made a monetary offer to this person to steal the papers, then it's clearly a conspiracy for espionage. And I don't think anybody would argue with that.
I agree with Bob there wholeheartedly. I mean, I'm not a legal expert, but I've read enough and I've watched enough shows where legal experts have spoken. Most of them have weighed in and says he has the constitutional right if, but that remains to be seen. So.
Is this the searing and transcendent capitulation that some have called it, or was this President Obama being very smart, moving to the middle and making the compromise that the American people wanted?
Sometimes I wish I could just have a straitjacket right now and start screaming. I consider myself a liberal, and I went and I looked it up today in Webster's. Favorable to progress or reform in political or religious affairs. So why do so many liberals want to hold things back? We have a political spectrum. We have a far right, we have a far left, or wait a minute, this is the left, this is the right. But they come together in a circle, and they both meet, and they're both intractable, and we tend to have despots there. And what a true liberal is going to do is move forward and create progress. And that's what Obama's trying to do. And I've been ranting on this program for months, so maybe he actually listen to me, about a
I'm
Clintonian,
sure he did. Yeah.
yes, of course, about a Clintonian presidency.
Right.
And that's when this country was at its most prosperous. So what's wrong with that? Why would a liberal be fighting that?
And
feeling just great. So this whole idea that he was fatally ill and that was the reason is just doesn't
Even if
hold
he
up.
is fatally ill, why should there be compassion for a person who's shown everything but compassion for society?
And what I really don't get here is how a sovereign government like the UK, not exactly the nation it once was in the days of the British Empire, but not a weak nation either, one would hope, is saying, oh, we're scared of what Libya might do to us.
Of Libya.
What?
So this whole thing is an embarrassment more than anything, and we want to prosecute
and another
Julian
reason why I
Assange
should be
for
living
this.
here and not back in.
It is.
Right. Let's get back to the other story we were talking about with Leland Videt in Jerusalem. What do you? This is a fairly stunning, searing and transcendent capitulation once again from the administration. Is it saying, "Okay, Israel,
Say that
go
5
on,
times
go ahead with the
yes.
go ahead with the settlements"? I mean, what on earth?
First of all, I'm Jewish, and I consider myself quite often a Zionist. I don't understand if you have an intractable opponent like the Israelis do, who don't want to compromise and don't like to make a deal. Why be difficult with your most generous and closest ally, America? I thought when Netanyahu was locked in a room with Hillary a few weeks ago that everything would be hunky-dory. I mean,
Nobody usually comes out.
Yeah, I mean, I would do anything to be let out of the room with Hillary. Please, what do you want? I'll give you my kids. You want my stock portfolio? Fine, here it is.
The panel back in on a serious story that is breaking right now. A Baltimore man, according to the U.S. Justice Department, has been arrested on charges he plotted to detonate a vehicle bomb at a U.S. Armed Forces recruitment center in Maryland. This was another of those sting operations, it appears. Bob and Rob, it seems to me we're obviously seeing an uptick, and officials are very worried about an uptick in domestic terrorism. But we're also seeing these so-called sting operations, the one in Oregon as well.
Yep.
Where does a sting operation lapse into entrapment? Because I think that's a thing that some people are worried. I know Judge Napolitano here, on our air here has talked about this.
Yeah, and clearly it's a concern, but frankly, the way things are going, I think we're going to have to err on the side of entrapment. I know that's a horrible thing to say. People don't like the word. But the reality is there are very few things that the government can do to really protect its citizenry. And that kind of operation and intensive surveillance are really the only possibilities, because, you know, these weapons are getting to be so teeny that they can be hidden anywhere. They can do a huge amount of damage in Times Square, other things. And I think that Americans are going to really have to get their arms around the idea that there is a choice to be made between traditional personal freedoms on the one hand and national security on the other.
Rob, are you comfortable with the way these sting operations are being handled?
Well, it's a slippery slope and a fine line. I mean, but there's a big difference. It's like we entrapped John DeLorean years ago, who was a completely innocent guy, and all of a sudden somebody gave him like 20 kilos of coke and said, this will bail you out if you deal this. I mean, I think this is a lot different. And again, it's probably better to err on the side of entrapment, although it's something we have to be careful about. Otherwise, we're going to be obliterating human rights.
How worried are you about this rise in domestic terrorism?
I'm hugely worried about it. I mean, I probably shouldn't say this on the air either, but I can tell you this: when I take the train from Penn Station home, I don't spend any excess time hanging around in the very crowded areas of Penn Station. I'm very worried about it. I think the government, honestly, has done an amazing job over the last many years now of protecting us from further significant domestic terrorism events. It's inevitable that some people will get through the system. It's going to happen. We have to change our perception of these kinds of issues and understand what they really are about and understand what the right way is going to be to deal with them going forward.
So we have to give up some liberties to protect ourselves?
I think we have to give up political correctness. It's like taking the shirt off an 8-year-old boy from Nebraska so that we won't be profiling is not going to help us in the war on terror. It's going to hinder us. So maybe I'm switching from my liberal mode, but I don't like to clearly define myself in any way. But I travel too much and I see too many ludicrous things happen at airports.
So you'd support profiling?
Yes, I would.
Yeah, it's only logical. And as you say, I mean, this is the whole point. Political correctness is great, but it has its limits. And when you're talking about these kinds of issues where there's really no other effective idea to protect us, what are we going to do?
Do you think there is any sense in which profiling is perhaps going on, but just nobody wants to admit it anyway?
Yes.
Wouldn't that be the sensible way to do it? To profile, but never admit you profile? If that's the
maybe
way
that's happening to a degree, but I still, on this show, I always use the example of my father about 4 years ago who was humiliated at the Dallas airport. He's a winner of the Bronze Star, at the time a very old, frail man who was not a terrorist, and it was just a ludicrous scene that wasted the time of everybody, slowed down the whole movement of the airport because he had an artificial hip, and so it beeped, and they nearly stripped him in front of everybody, and those kind of things are just stupid and a waste of everybody.
Rob Taub at robtaub, robtaub.com.
Thank you.
Thanks both for being with us today.